So good evening, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. We're here this evening to present the 2017 Sterling Prize for Controversy. This unique prize is the result of the vision of Ted and Nora Sterling, who established the endowment actually for the prize in 1993 at Simon Fraser University for work that recognizes and provokes or contributes to the understanding of controversy. So to open this evening's ceremony and bid you an official welcome, I'd like to invite Elder Margaret George from SFU to the podium. Margaret.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, to Tsleil-Waututh, and the shared territory of Vancouver, and welcome to this evening's event. Just a very quick prayer to get each and everyone going here. You may remain seated, and welcome to our special guests. Great Spirit, thank you for bringing us together this evening. Just guide our words, our thoughts, and our actions, letting us always remember that we are the leaders and the mentors of those who follow us, those who witness what we say and what we do. I ask Great Spirit to bless your communities and where you come from, and your families for allowing you to do the work that you do. I ask Great Spirit just to bring a very special blessing on this evening's event, all my relations.
Thank you, Elder Margaret. So my name is Ron Eidenberg. I'm the chair of the Sterling Committee, and it's my very pleasant duty to host this evening's event. We're here in the Asia Pacific Hall of the Morris J. Wask Center for Dialogue, and we're also in your home at www.sfu.ca/Sterling Prize. And we're also tweeting this evening, so if you're listening and you'd like to send in a question, use the hashtag SFU Sterling Prize, all one word. And we'll hopefully be able to work some of your questions into the response section of the evening later. So this is how we'll proceed. Over the next few minutes, you'll hear about the prize from me, a few words from me, from Dr. Peter Keller, who's SFU's Vice President Academic and Provost, about why SFU cares about controversy. We'll then announce the recipient and award the prize. The recipient will give a lecture, and there'll be some time following that for questions and answers. A reception will follow outside in the atrium, to which everybody's invited, and of course you'll be able to be there and congratulate the recipient. So as I mentioned, Nora and Ted Sterling established the prize in 1993, and the award is given annually, and those of you who have been watching will have seen the pictures of the awardees over the years. So this is from the terms of reference that describe the prize. So these are Nora and Ted Sterling's own words that they wrote when they established it back in 1993. The Sterling Prize may be awarded for work in any field, including, but not limited to, the fine arts, humanities, social sciences, the natural sciences, and education. And recipients over the years have been in all of those fields. To be eligible, the work must be the object of or present a meaningful analysis of the conduct or consequences of controversy. However, the award must be more than simply controversial. It should present new ways of looking at the world, be daring and creative, decidedly unconventional and distinctly untraditional. In short, the Sterling Prize celebrates work that challenges complacency, but it also must meet recognizably high standards and be morally and ethically sound. And I'm sure you'll agree with me at the end of the evening that tonight's recipients meets all of those criteria. The award is also unique. You know, I've been on the committee for quite a long time now in one form or another, and I've never encountered a prize anywhere that is anything like this particular one. The committee that considers the nominations is meant to be broadly representative of our institution as a whole. It includes students, staff, and faculty, men and women, and diverse backgrounds of all kinds are represented there. And I'd be remiss if I did not take just a minute to thank the members of this year's committee for their service. Louise Godin, Professor of Mathematics, Mary Aylesworth is Director of Procurement Services, Dr. Jan McLean is Senior Lecturer in the Faculty of Education. Vance Williams is Professor of Chemistry. And Arjen, your name isn't on here, Arjen Mundy, is our student representative. So thanks all of you for your service. And I'd now like to call on Dr. Peter Keller, our Vice President and Provost, to say a few words. Peter.
Good evening and welcome everybody, and thank you, Dr. Edenberg. So before I share some of my own observations, I want to welcome and ask a special guest to come up who's asked to say a few words. So please join me in welcoming the Honourable Judy Darcy, MLA for the constituency of New Westminster and British Columbia's Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. What a pleasure it is to be here with all of you. An awesome turnout to honor a really incredible guy who I just had. I've certainly followed his work for many years, but I had the great pleasure of meeting him personally over dinner tonight. And in addition to being controversial, which is why he is being awarded this special honor this evening, I've also learned that what some of my good friends have said about him is absolutely true, that he is a sweet, kind, and loving guy, in addition to being very controversial, but in the best sense of the word. I was quite shocked to discover that someone actually gives out an award for being controversial, which, what a remarkable thought. We should have a lot more of those awards, don't you think? Awards for controversy. Yes, I hear a little bit of applause for that. And tonight's 2017 recipient, Donald MacPherson, certainly fits those criteria. I am incredibly honored as British Columbia's first, and actually Canada's first, Minister for Mental Health and Addictions to be able to take part in this honoring ceremony tonight. As a longtime admirer of Donald's advocacy work, over the years, I've certainly followed his work, as I know that all of you have no doubt, his groundbreaking work in the field of drug policy, and I've certainly appreciated his views, and particularly in light of the crisis that we are living through today in British Columbia, the overdose crisis, the worst public health emergency in this province in decades. How lucky we are to have leaders like Donald MacPherson, who has had the courage for decades now to stand up and to break ground and to say sacred cows should no longer exist. This is about saving lives. As most of you probably know, Donald was really a pioneer in developing the 4 pillars approach to drug policy, for prevention, for treatment, for harm reduction, and enforcement. That work which led to the creation of Insight and prescription heroin treatment programs like those at the Crosstown Clinic here on the downtown east side. And as we all know, harm reduction strategies have been absolutely critically important in saving lives in the midst of this overdose crisis. And there is no question that hundreds, if not thousands, more people would have died if it were not for harm reduction programs in place in Vancouver, but also now across the province and across the country. So tonight we gather to recognize and to honor Donald MacPherson, who, along with other important work, was absolutely instrumental in shaping drug policy here in British Columbia, but also across the country. And that's why people turn to him right across the country and across the world for the groundbreaking work that he's been involved in. He certainly epitomizes the essence of a Sterling Prize award, as he does not shy away from controversy. And if I didn't know that before, I certainly learned it over dinner tonight. He knows that we cannot accept conventional wisdom, no matter what field we're talking about it, but especially when we're talking about drug policy and when lives are at stake. So I want to commend Donald for his groundbreaking work, congratulate him once again for winning the 2017 Sterling Award. Thank you so much for being able to be part of this, and let the event begin.
Thank you, Minister Darcy. So, could you imagine a world without controversy. I think every day in our lives we encounter controversy somewhere. And some of that controversy that we encounter daily is actually manufactured controversy. It's trivialized controversy. It's a type of controversy that you see in the mass media when discussing sports or celebrities or when people get voted off the islands. It's that type of controversy that really in some ways caters to the lowest common denominator. It's controversy that plays on fear or threat or vanity or a fragile belief in oneself. This type of controversy has a disdain for rational analysis, for objective evidence, or for truth. The Sterling Prize and tonight's lecture is very much about a different type of controversy. It is about controversy based on evidence, facts, objective reasoning, and informed debate. It's a type of controversy that brings new evidence and new thought to an accepted belief or theory, challenging core assumptions and how previous observations were interpreted. And it's a kind of controversy that the philosopher Thomas Kuhn associated with what he called paradigm shift. Now, this type of paradigm shifting controversy advances knowledge and usually also leads to a better place. You will understand that in the universities, we love this type of controversy, and we strive to excel at this type of controversy. Let me share with you another thought about controversy. What I find really interesting about controversy is that actually it's not consistent throughout history. What was accepted belief, conduct, or practice some time ago may no longer be acceptable or indeed found reasonable today. So something once accepted can become controversial over time. So there was a period where we burned fossil fuels without a second thought. Today, we know different based on scientific evidence. And I don't tell you anything that comes as a surprise when I say that climate change is controversial because there are very powerful interests at stake. Also, throughout history, we like to build statues for famous people and we like to name things after people. But then, later, we may discover that our values have changed and that what these people stand for or stood for now is no longer what we really value or hold high. So the statues and the names become controversial. Did you know that mercury was once used as a medicine for healing? Today, we know it to be poisonous. And I bet you that transition from using mercury to heal to avoiding mercury to stay healthy also was not controversial. So with those thoughts, let me simply join Dr. Edenberg in thanking the Wosk family for the generous gift which allows us to be here in this amazing hall today. And let me join him in thanking the Sterling family for endowing the Sterling Prize for Controversial Research, and then really move on to what you are all here for. So this year's winner of the Sterling Prize is Donald MacPherson. Now, Minister Darcy already has introduced Donald a little bit, but just in case you need to be reminded twice, he has worked for the city of Vancouver for 22 years, where he was North America's first drug policy coordinator. He's the author of Vancouver's groundbreaking 4 Pillars drug strategy, the 4 Pillars drug strategy called for a new approach to drug problems based on public health principles and the appropriate regulation of psychoactive substances. In 2007, he received the Kaiser Foundation National Award of Excellence in Public Policy in Canada. In 2009, he was awarded the Richard Dennis Drug Peace Award for outstanding achievements in the field of drug policy reform by the Drug Policy Alliance in the United States. And of course, in that same year, the city of Vancouver was awarded the Canadian Urban Institute's Secure City Award for the 4 Pillars drug strategy. So, Donald MacPherson really is one of Canada's leading figures, indeed one of the international leading figures in drug policy, advocating drug policies based on principles of public health, scientific evidence, human rights, and social inclusion. He currently is director of the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition, a national coalition of organizations and individuals working to improve Canada's drug policies. And this coalition is a partner project with the Centre for Applied Research in Mental Health and Addictions. We know it better as CARMA, homed here in British Columbia at Simon Fraser University. And indeed, Donald is currently adjunct professor in the Faculty of Health Sciences at Simon Fraser University. Now, those are words that introduce Donald MacPherson, but a video really is a much better way of bringing him and his work closer to you. So please ask me in watching the video.
I just want to remind everybody that we're in the context of a public health emergency. 6 minutes is a long time if you're experiencing an overdose.
It's not hard to be controversial when it comes to drug policy. Anyone who suggests that we should regulate drugs, that's a controversial thing to say. I'm an accidental drug policy person. I came to this issue by standing on the front steps of the Carnegie Community Center for 10 years, watching the drug scene develop and watching the overdose epidemic of the 90s take place. The four pillars approach is drug treatment, prevention, harm reduction, and policing. But it also had two recommendations that symbolically said, let's do it differently. And those were the recommendations to establish supervised consumption services and to provide heroin under a heroin-assisted treatment program. And those two recommendations said to the community, said to other politicians, said to the rest of the country that, hey, Vancouver's trying something new. So in 2009, I was working with a group of Canadians. We worked together to develop the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition. We're based in the Faculty of Health Sciences at Simon Fraser University. Our coalition is developing a project to look at a better regulatory model for all of these substances. And we'll be talking to people across the country. We'll be talking to people who use drugs. We'll be talking to families and parents and scientists and medical professionals, and police officers, just to say, look, surely we intelligent Canadians can come up with a system that is better than the one we have now.
Donald, can we ask you to come up to accept this year's Nora and Ted Sterling Prize in support of controversy? Congratulations. Well done. Certificate for you, a check for you, and I think we're supposed to step out here for a picture. Can we supposed to step out here for a picture? Which way do you want to? Oh, back there? You're going to go over here? Oh, there you go. You choreographed. Okay, there you go. Congratulations. Well done. That's all you get. All right. So now it is time for the Sterling Lecture. Tonight's Sterling Lecture is titled Heroin at Your Corner Store. I knew I was going to do that. Corner Store. Joining Donald MacPherson will be respondents. Karen Ward. Karen, where are you? Karen Ward is there. Artist and activist. And Adam Kahane, author, facilitator, and the director of Rios Partners. The podium is yours.
Holy mackerel, jeez. Little did I know what I was getting myself into. Actually, I didn't have any idea what I was getting myself into because it was Susan Boyd and Carolyn Mousseau who nominated me and didn't tell me. So it's such a great honor to be receiving this award. The last time I was in this at a Sterling Prize award was Professor Emeritus Bruce Alexander, who's sitting over here, who has probably influenced anyone who's touched upon drug policy, addiction, problematic substance use in the last 50 years in this country. So I'm so honored that Bruce is here tonight. Thanks to Dr. Peter Keller and to Dr. Ron Edenberg for their assistance with this event. They've dealt extremely well with all the controversies I've thrown at them thus far. I think they're ready for anything at this point. And thanks to Minister Darcy for her kind words. I might cry later I didn't want to cry right away. You're too kind. And bringing greetings from the province. We hope you learned something tonight and take it back to your colleagues, as we know the road ahead of you is not an easy one because of the complexity of this issue. And thanks to Janet Weber and her team for fretting about so many details that I never thought would have thought about. So it's a first-class event organizing team, and I know you do all sorts of other things at Simon Fraser. And to Ian Bryce for that film, which was a real gift to me and to others, and the great communications work he did on this his project. And thanks to my incredible assistant, Caroline Mousseau. Where is she? Where is Caroline? There she is, right back there. I don't know. I can't say enough about the support I get from Caroline, who is foremost a brilliant painter. I want you to know that. She's a painter, but also turns out to be brilliant at most other things, unlike most painters. Did I say something wrong? I live with a painter. Dig it deeper, Donald. Dig the hole deeper. And including spreadsheets, graphic design, event organizing, PowerPoints, and strategic advice, and best tips on how to feed a sick cat. And to Dr. Susan Boyd, her partner in mischief. Where's Susan? Where's Susan? Over here, who was the other co-nominator. Susan's a monster historian of the Canadian drug policy and the harms that Canadian drug policies have caused over the years. And she writes a book about every 5 minutes, and she'll have another one coming out in a couple of weeks, which is got lots of pictures in it. So for those of us who, don't really like academic stuff, we can look at the pictures and read wonderful stories about how bad Canada's drug policy has been. I'd also like to turn your attention to the wonderful painting at the east end of this magnificent room. It is called Map of Vancouver and was painted by the love of my life, Landon Mackenzie, and who's sitting right here. With my daughter, Jeffrin, and Landon's brother, Darcy. The whole family has trouble with names, so now suddenly I am having the same trouble. The piece was commissioned by the Heller family, the generous and sophisticated Paul and Edwina Heller, and their daughter Kitty Heller, the joyful and ferocious labor lawyer who was so supportive of the art and drug world that Landon and I have inhabited for the last 30 years. Not only did Kitty Heller support the arts immensely, but on the day that the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition did our public launch on November 30th, 2011, $50,000 appeared in SFU's advancement office from the late Kitty Heller, whose will most likely said something like, whenever MacPherson gets his fucking act together to get this project off the ground, give this money to the good drug policy reform work he's taking on. So the Heller family is in the room, the Wass family is in the room, and that painting that Landon did, one of the very first, if not the first interview she had was with Bud Osborne, a hero of many of ours in the room, who talked about his route every day he worked in his fierce advocacy for public health and harm reduction. And that's one of the layers. There are many other layers in the painting. So please spend some time with it. And it's not badly lit tonight, Landon. There's usually at least 2 bulbs out. So I credit the new management of the Wass Center for actually getting 4 light bulbs in there. And of course, thanks to former Mayor Philip Owen for his courageous leadership in bringing the whole community of Vancouver into the discussion when when we first got started in this transformative drug policy project back in the mid-90s. Funnily enough, I can't mention Philip Owen without mentioning Dean Wilson, who with Shelley Tomick and the PHS Community Services Society took the Harper government to the Supreme Court of Canada. Dean, where are you? To defend the rights of Canadians to have access to evidence-based public health programs like Insight, a truly landmark decision. And I'd also like to mention the mostly unsung heroes in the country's response to the overdose disaster that is moving across Canada. Groups of drug users, people who use drugs, inspired in large part by the early work of Van Du, and many which are working tirelessly across the country on the front lines of the overdose crisis. I saw Jordan Westfall, I think, is Jordan here. Jordan is the president of the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs, which is a national organization bringing people together to fight for all of those things that were won at the Supreme Court of Canada decision. I really appreciate the fact that Karen Ward is here to help with this evening, and that Adam Kahane for agreeing to help out tonight. I know they will add some value and grounding to the world, according to Donald, that you are about to hear about. So I'll move into that wasn't a lecture, okay? Do we have any time left is the question. I'll move in, there it is, heroin at your corner store. What do you think? It's a model. We get lots of stuff at that corner store. I'll get to my rationale. Oops, wrong one. I'm really honored to receive the prize, a check. I don't know if anyone noticed, but I was handed a check tonight, $5,000, very generous check, and I'm donating the funds to several places. One is Raise Shit T-shirts that we hope you got one on the way in. This is the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs at one of their meetings. Looks like the end of the meeting. They're happy it's over, and Jordan and his board and people are organizing a mission to Portugal. And I just noticed an hour ago on my Twitter feed that a GoFundMe page went up to try and raise $10,000 to take some drug users to Portugal. And that's an amazing thing because Portugal people have to visit it to see what they're doing there. So I'm donating part of the award to the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs. And this is the cutest, most wonderful organization of people who use drugs in the country. Sorry, Van Du, you're beautiful and wonderful too. Hand Up, Halifax Area Network of Drug-Using People, is a very new organization, and they're just so cool, and they're so inspiring. And they're working in Atlantic Canada, where the discourse around drug policy and harm reduction is tough. It's a tough sell. It's much more conservative sort of landscape there. This is an organization that I'm involved with. I'm the vice chair of the International Drug Policy Consortium, who runs a campaign on June 26th every year called Support, Don't Punish. And it's a global campaign. These are people from all over the world holding up a sign saying support, don't punish, and organizing events in their communities, from cities to small towns, because in most countries, people who use drugs are not supported. They are punished intensely and immensely. In the Philippines, they're being murdered. They're at the decree of the president right now. So things are really bad globally, and things are really bad locally. I said to someone earlier that obviously this isn't an award for success, because we're here in this, maybe it's success at being controversial, but we're here in the midst of the second disaster that we've seen. I mentioned Bud Osborne. He's in the room tonight. Bud has been in this room before. He passed away at 66 4 years ago, I think it was, 3 or 4 years ago, and he was an inspiration to us all. And where the title of this talk came from, Heroin in Your Corner Store, was back in the 90s when we were many of the people I know in this room were pulling our hair out, trying to figure out how to move the agenda forward, how to move this issue of drug policy out of the dark ages and into the present, and do some good evidence-based, deliver some good services, and change some policy frameworks that were and still are killing people. And we'd advocate for legalizing drugs. And invariably, people would say, oh, God, you want to legalize drugs. What do you want, heroin and 7-Elevens? And we'd have to, defend ourselves and everything like that. And it was people didn't really understand. Then one day, out of the blue, Bud phones me up, and he said, Donald, the sirens were in the background, the lights were flashing and blaring. It was healthcare by ambulance, as Dean Wilson used to call it. Bud said, Donald, I think the 7-Eleven model would be better than what we got. Because at least someone would have to talk to someone who wasn't a drug dealer to get their heroin, and they'd be buying heroin, not something else. It's a low bar, I know, but that's what it felt like. It felt like what we have at that time and what we still have is a disaster, and it's not getting any better. I want you to look at the front, the left-hand side of this graph. And doesn't go back as far as I wanted, but there were 64 overdoses in British Columbia in whatever that first year is, and something happened. And really tonight is really about, it's high level, the two disasters have happened on our watch in BC. Let's not have another one happen. So this was the first one. Same thing happened recently with the fentanyl crisis. Something happened in the heroin market. Heroin became cheap and available and strong, and there was a crisis. This was the attitude at the time, and this is still the attitude in most places in Canada today. Fix at your own risk, take your chances. We know that drug supply is toxic, but that's not our problem. Here are the guys that regulate our drugs currently. This is the United Nations gang. These are the guys that make sure the products move across borders, make sure they move to your street corner, your neighborhood, your town, your village. Here's the Bacon Brothers, the Red Scorpions. They were formed in a youth detention center in British Columbia. And a couple of them are dead now, a couple are in prison. But these are the people who we trust to deliver substances to people who have what we call a health issue or a health problem. Many of them do, some of them don't, but many people have an addiction. We know they're going to be purchasing these drugs, and these are the people we leave it to deliver the drugs. So there's that iconic picture of Dean. This is what it led to. It led to at 400 overdoses in 1 year in British Columbia. How terrible is that? That was right through the roof. That was the worst we'd ever seen. And it just didn't stop for all through the 90s. The Four Pillars drug strategy grew out of that, and it was an attempt to try and build a roadmap to sanity. And it was, inclusive, it was comprehensive, it was something the mayor of Vancouver could wave around and say, we need help, the forest is on fire, we need help to put out the problem. It had the Four Pillars. It was basically the Swiss drug strategy. We took it from Switzerland. We stole it from Switzerland, changed the name, translated it into English. Well, not quite that copied, but it was an innovation in Europe that had a huge impact in most Western European countries. It wasn't easy to get some of this stuff done. It wasn't easy to get insight. There's a demonstration. It's not easy. Change is not easy. Change is hard. And I think Minister Darcy knows that because she's worked in her working career has been working with the union movement and trying to make better working conditions for people. So, but change is hard. One of the concepts that we came out of that with the Four Pillars was learning what the Swiss learned, that people were totally disconnected. And we tried to figure out, and innovation came about. I guess that's the point here, is that we innovated. We tried to do things differently. So the Swiss changed their model, and we tried to emulate that. We tried to build in more services at the street level. We tried to bring people into contact with services. We opened up safe injection sites, one. Dr. Peters Center opened up one the year before Insight. Youth programs, outreach, these are all the things that we were really saying are important. It's a familiar list. The difference between low threshold methadone. We got a little heroin trial going. We had other services, treatment services. And what the Swiss saw, and this is the Swiss data, is that they had much more contact with people. People were engaged in a range of low threshold services. They had to change their whole system because they were out of touch. And the drug scenes in Switzerland were an absolute total disaster. High HIV rates, high overdose death rates, and a lot of marginalized people living in the parks and in the streets. We tried to emulate that. We tried to move in that direction. The Swiss were able to scale their system up to a sufficient point where they had a much bigger impact than we did. We lost the way. Somewhere along the way, we started down a road and we lost the way. The Insight was hugely symbolic when it appeared. It was a symbolic wedge into the PHS people call it a demilitarized zone in the war on drugs. It was a place that was welcoming. It was a place that you could come and not be stigmatized. It was a place that come on in and shoot up. That was opened in 2003. And at the time, it was revolutionary. It was radical. And somehow we lost our momentum. Politics changed. The urgency changed. The overdose rate came down to a tolerable 200 to 250 or 180 to 220. Still an outrageously high number of people for our city, our province. What's happening is that now supervised consumption services are spreading across the country. Many, many years after they could have. The political climate wasn't as inviting, and the resistance within health authorities and provincial governments to actually move in this direction there's a ton of resistance to change when it comes to this stuff. And here's Mayor Nenshi. I love this quote. I find because they desperately want injection rooms in Calgary and Edmonton. They're trying to make up for lost time. They're trying to get these things open. I find that they almost feel like an admission that we're not able to solve the problem. But that said, my personal feelings aside, the evidence is absolutely clear. Absolutely clear. They save people's lives, and our job today is to save people's lives. What I liked is the first part. It's like he makes him really uncomfortable that he might have to admit that what we're doing is not working. Absolutely, Mayor Nenshi. You should be yelling that out at the top of your lungs. You have to admit that things are not working and move on. This is jumping to the present. This is another form of showing the misery and death in British Columbia over the last few years. You can see the rates of overdose deaths going up. This has happened in a few years. And we saw it coming. And this is not a failure of our treatment systems. It's not a failure of our mental health systems. It's not a failure of our prescribing practices. It's a catastrophic failure of our drug policies, of our drug control policies. And I would be the last person to argue that we should spend more money on trying to control the illegal drug market. People say, well, what are you going to do? Surrender. Yes, surrender, for God's sake. Give that up and start doing something that's actually going to work. It's alarming that right now there are more fentanyl, more people who are being arrested for dealing fentanyl are being charged with murder. And that is just going to take us down a road that is going to double down on the war on drugs. It's going to arrest the wrong people, charge the wrong people with murder, and not have an impact on the actual drug market. this is what's killing British Columbians, something we don't have in our drug policies: resilience, the capacity to deal with change and continue to develop. We talk about resilience when disaster strikes, and usually ecological disasters, earthquakes, those sorts of things. Well, we've seen 2 huge upheavals in our illegal drug market, and we have not been able to respond. It's taken 6 years to get one little dinky place like Insight in the ground. It took another 12 years to get the next ones in the ground. It's just not doable under the current policy framework. We need a nimble policy framework, a policy framework that can allow municipalities, provinces, and the federal government to move in response to situations. This is the resilience, it's about resilience and adaptability. We have not adopted. We have a 1908 drug policy in the year 2017. It has not adopted to modern technology, to globalization, to different mixes of drugs, different reasons for taking drugs. It's not available. And so all of this, the resilience loop is about a natural process of consolidation. Think of a forest at its peak. It collapses and it regenerates and renews. We're up at the top with this toxic drug supply, which is a colossal failure of our drug policy framework, and we're not changing it up. But look at what happened at the bottom. Cannabis is being changed up. Cannabis, the least harmful of the drugs that are out there, we're getting a new approach. We need to do that with the other substances. We've invested so much money in the system at the top of that loop on the right, but it's not working, and it's an immovable object. And I think politicians have trouble moving the system in a different direction in terms of the investments. And it is about investments. If we keep investing in the wrong places, we're not going to see a change. This shows that the bar graph is the investment in American drug policy over the years, and the lines are price going down and purity going up. So the more we've invested, the more the U.S. has invested, hasn't had the impact that we thought it would have, or they thought it would have. So the harms of prohibition. There have been well documented. The paper Count the Costs from the Transformative Drug Policy Foundation. It uses a lot of United Nations data to basically just here are the harms: undermines development and security, threatens public health, wastes billions on drug law enforcement, creates crime, promotes stigma, deforestation and pollution, think about Colombia, undermines human rights, think about the Philippines and other, in Russia, for example, where drug users are vilified and punished for all sorts of things. They're clear. But on the other end of this spectrum, we have the harms of corporate promotion, and I think we're very familiar with them too. Industry-funded research discredits scientific findings about health dangers. Think the early tobacco stuff. Maximizes profit through promotion and misleading safety information. The industry-funded research, the controversy tonight within the controversy is that Theodore Sterling made a lot of his money from big tobacco. He worked for the tobacco tobacco research organization that funded scientists to do research on that muddied the waters around. In his particular case, it was secondhand smoke. Is secondhand smoke really dangerous? Well, his research pointed that it might not be. It might be the ventilation systems. And this is becoming a well-documented sort of case, and he was not alone. So anyways, that's not my issue, but I had to mention it because I found out about it. With alcohol, the imperative to expand markets and target specific populations, which women now are being targeted by a big alcohol, and cannabis corporate profits. Your guess is as good as mine. How is that going to play out? Is big cannabis going to be trying to find new markets for cannabis? We will see. What we're advocating is a public health approach, which reduces the harms both of prohibition and of corporate promotion. And we all know that's a battle. We've lost the battle with the organized criminals, more or less, and it's a constant battle with industry, and industry pushing for broader markets and looser regulatory situations. Through a public health approach, we look at what's happening now is psychedelics are being used in therapeutic contexts. So illegal drugs that are illegal at the street level are now being used in medical therapeutic contexts. Prescription heroin and stimulants. Certainly there are prescription heroin programs in Europe, a small one in Vancouver, and the stimulant maintenance has been experimented with in a variety of places in the world. Decriminalization, Portugal. Regulation, cannabis. Drug checking, where we set up testing at festivals. These are all things that are actually happening. So the world is beginning to change. We are gravitating towards a public health model where we find the drugs that will be no longer part of the criminal world and controlled by organized criminals and gangs, and become part of a regulatory framework. And the bottom of this graph is ways of regulation. And we need to move substances from the criminal side of it towards the lower end of the U, and also pull the drugs on the right-hand side, alcohol, tobacco, cannabis now, medical cannabis, make sure the harms of big alcohol, big tobacco, and big cannabis should it appear. And we have the tools to do these. We don't have many tools with illegal drugs. So enforcement, education, treatment, harm reduction, socially stigmatized through criminalization. We have limited responses with the illegal drugs. With what's happening with cannabis, it's happening as we speak. The provincial government is trying to figure out how it's going to be regulated in 10 provinces, 3 territories. The federal government is working on it. These are the tools that we can use, and we have to pick and choose whether we use all of them or some of them. You'll see 13 regulatory agencies in Canada within the next year. So we can do it. So why can't we do it with other substances? Some of these substances, like heroin, might remain in a fairly medicalized context. But these, and we have to thank Mark Hayden for a lot of the thinking around this. Mark is right here. Mark Hayden has been thinking about regulation of illegal drugs for a long time and has made huge contributions to the discussion. And it's not like we're crazy. We're not crazy. The Consumers Union report in 1972 said that, among other things, anyone who is where is it? I can't see the quote. That the United States drug policies and practices be properly revised to ensure that no narcotics addict need get his drug from the black market. Early 70s, heroin around, and the Consumers Union, the people who tell you what TVs to get and what cars to buy, were telling us we should not be allowing people to have the only source be the illegal market. Vince Kane report, the chief coroner of British Columbia. Thank you. Canadian laws and the United Nations conventions control this matter, but they ought not detract from the reality of the situation in British Columbia. We have the problem, and we must do what we can about it now. Consequently, I am recommending the establishment of a commission to examine and challenge those legal aspects of the problem. Vince was a great guy. He arranged the province trying to figure this out. The problem must be looked at with regard to not only aspect of deaths from heroin and cocaine, but rather the entire smorgasbord of available illicit narcotics, both so-called soft and hard drugs. Simultaneously, I'm recommending the decriminalization of simple possession of specific soft and hard drugs. And Vince was no pushover. So here he's chief coroner recommending, considering legalization and recommending decriminalization of drugs in 1994. The city of Vancouver, in their seminal prevention paper that a number of people, Lindsay Richardson had her hand in that, Zarina Mullah, who's in the room, had her hand in that, and the three of us wrote this paper. And City Council approved it, and they basically asked the federal government to establish a process with broad participation to consider regulatory alternatives to the current policy of prohibition for currently illegal drugs. The Lancet Commission, 2016, decriminalized minor offenses. The same commission, take a scientific approach to regulatory experiments. We believe that the weight of the evidence for the health and other harms of criminal markets and other consequences of prohibition, cataloged in this commission, which had about 25 authors and drew from academia around the world, and they made these recommendations. The British Medical Journal in 2016. The title of the article is "The War on Drugs Has Failed. Doctors Should Lead Calls for Drug Policy Reform." Doctors are often the most risk-averse group. These headlines appeared over the last 10 days in Canada. A couple of these are not in Canada. Most of them are Canadian. There's something happening. There's some consensus building, and it's not surprising. People are learning firsthand that the disaster is unfolding, and that there is more and more support for thinking outside the box. And how are we going to accomplish that? I'll close with saying what governments need to do, and this is, Minister Darcy, this is not the whole list. I'm short of time tonight, so but it'll be enough work for a few months, I'm sure. Governments need to acknowledge the catastrophic failure. They need to admit that we need to change our ways. They need to stop pretending that more of the same will work. And we really have to resist the institutions within government and outside of government for clamoring to get more funding, to do more of the same, and we'll be jammed up at the top of that resilience loop again with a rigid system that does not respond. We need to immediately decriminalize possession for personal use, and that can be done by instructing the police not to bother anyone for personal possession. I'm hoping the provincial authorities can look into that, and at a time of an emergency, to instruct police to just don't bother people who are for personal possession and use. And we need to replace the drug supply through public health distribution mechanisms. If it was food, we would truck in food. If it was water, we would truck in water. We have the drugs. They're in cabinets, in pharmacies, in hospitals. We have the drugs. We're not trucking them anywhere. We're not allowing people at them. We're not figuring out how to give people greater access to it. We need to do that outside of a treatment context. Treatment's a whole other thing that needs to be expanded. And we need to support safe tables for collaboration on alternative regulatory approaches. We need to make it safe for a politician to stand up and say, you know what, we're going to study it. We're going to study this. We're going to look for new ideas and new approaches. They don't have to make any decisions, but they have to open the door. And I think you'll start to see that in the next little while, because what we're doing has not worked. The numbers bear that out. This has been a disaster. I'm honored to be here receiving an award. I know the people in this room, I know a lot of them, and it's a very sad month. It's a very sad week. It's a very sad few years we've been working together. And surely to God, like the little video said, we can bring the smartest Canadians together and come up with a better system. Thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I remember that now. Everyone has a microphone. It's a nightmare. Everyone has a microphone. Press a little button if you want to talk or put your hand up, and we'll only one at a time though, because it doesn't work any other way. So, right now I'd like to introduce Karen Ward, who's an artist and activist, a poet and historian, and a person who uses drugs, who has lived in the downtown east side for the past 10 years. Karen has an MA in history and has been active with the Carnegie Action Project, the Heart of the City Festival, Gallery Gachet, and describes herself, and I hope I get this right, as someone who works to give voice to those who are more silent in our world. So you're welcome to stand here or there.
Good evening, everybody. Very incredibly honored to have been asked by Dawn to come and speak briefly tonight about what we're all talking about, or trying so hard to talk about. And how we talk about what's happening matters so much. The words we use, the words we struggle to find, the words that get caught on the edges of our minds and ideas, the words that are never enough, and the words that we use to break the silence. Words like bloodbath and massacre and slaughter have become commonplace. But in the downtown east side, we talk a lot. And we struggle through it. Part of the problem is that no one's ever really. It's so rare to be really listened to. I remember I asked somebody, I said, we were talking about something, and someone said, what do you think? And the person was just stunned, and I was like, I don't remember when I was last asked what I thought. And we talk about, what people talk about is genocide. We've lost count. We can't count the number of people that have been lost, the number of times someone's been brought back, the number of friends, neighbors, family, the different ways you talk about the people you care about. And it's true, and it's so distressing when you look in the paper or you hear from people, we just need more data. No, we really don't need any more data. We don't need, we look at these representations and these numbers, and the numbers numb at this point. The numbers numb, and they're just representations of so many lives, abstracted and less raw, less real somehow. And feel we that remain on the battlefield, shell-shocked and all. You struggle, really. You're struggling for solid ground. And you're wondering what's happening, because you thought the world ended. But everybody else is still getting up and going to work. That their dope is legal. And in the downtown east side, people talk about overdose, but for months and months, people have been talking about poisoning and cast about looking for someone to blame, something to blame, something happened, what's happening, who's responsible. Everyone is responsible, we're all responsible, I'm responsible, you are too, all of us are. Because this is about choices. This isn't a wildfire, and this isn't a hurricane, and this isn't falling from the sky. It's the result of choices that have been made for over 100 years. choices that we've accepted as normal, and choices that have led to this. Choices that have led to a situation where people are too scared to go to work Monday morning because they're scared of how many pieces of paper are going to be stuffed under the mailbox about who dies Saturday night. And we talk about harm reduction, but we've got to think, very carefully about what we're saying when these words trip off the tongue so casually because we say them so much. And we need to think about what that means, harm reduction. We actually need to stop harm. We need to stop harming each other with everything we do and the choices we make and the way we live. That's what this is about. That's why the people who are considered the weakest, who I constantly emphasize are actually so incredibly strong. The people who are spoken of as the weakest and the vulnerable and the marginalized, who are so strong. We need to stop harming that with every choice we make and the ways we live and the way we decided that any way that these folks, that I try to break that marginal, vulnerable weakness is itself criminal, disordered, judged, and isolated. Harm needs to stop being the dominant policy because it's literally killing us. We talk sometimes as well in the downtown east side. The idea is that this mass poisoning is actually accelerated displacement. It's taking too long to get people out. This is a expression of the drug, the poison is an expression of the relentless push out. The downtown east side has become, for many of us, myself, I didn't know until I moved to the downtown east side. I didn't know what home meant, that there was a place you could feel safe, know your neighbors, be okay, be yourself. I had no idea that that was what that meant. For so many people, it's a place in this country, Canada, when you've been kicked out of everywhere else, when you've been shoved aside anywhere else, when you're not okay anywhere else, there's that last little place that's getting smaller and smaller, where it's all right to be that, to be who you are, to be that way. You'll have someone to talk to, no matter how bad it is. And now this is happening. Do they hate us that much? And do they hate us that much where people are in such pain that even the strongest painkillers imagined have to be reinvented? And then these people, so wounded and lost and abandoned and discarded, need to be pushed out further. And then this is the emergency. And we're told, and we say, we need to say, don't use alone. Come inside. Here's a tent. Do please come inside. We have naloxone. We have ways to help. This is an emergency. These are emergency measures. And that's exactly the point, because people are that alone. And that's the catastrophe, that things have fallen apart so much that we're in this situation. And yes, this is about health in the broadest possible sense, but it's about the health of all of us. Because in that sense, it is about justice. It's about basic justice, access to the ability to live a human life. And that's what I've learned from the downtown east side, through Vandu, through Dawn, and through the learning to dare to think through that silence. And I've learned that from drugs too. And if not this, I just ask, if not this, the massive willed slaughter of hundreds of hurt people, then what will it take? What? And if not here on these stolen lands, this last place, this terminal city, then where? Because this is about choices, and we need to make different ones. And if not now, when? Thanks.
I'm wearing a mic. I don't have to. Now I'd like to introduce Adam Kahane, and Adam's going to talk for a short time, and then we're going to take some questions. But Adam is he's a friend and a colleague who I have learned much from when it comes to working towards transformative change with difficult issues. He's a director. He is a director of Rios Partners, an enterprise that has been designing and facilitating systemic change projects for 20 years and have built up a rigorous set of transformative methods. Adam will be delivering a public lecture on October 12th called Collaborating with the Enemy at the Fletcher Theatre just across the street. So you have to go to Eventbrite and you'll get that information. It's free, I believe, is it? No, it's $20. I don't know. You don't know either. Adam, thank you for coming and pitching in and giving your thoughts in response to my certainty of what the answer is.
Donald. I'm very happy to be here for the simple reason that I have such admiration and affection for Donald and for what he's doing. I feel honored to be able to participate in this evening, and my approach is that anything that Don thinks should be done, I would like to help get done. I don't really have much expertise in drug policy as such, so I won't comment on the specifics of the proposal that Donald made. I've had one experience, but one that had a big influence on me at least. In 2012, when the country of Colombia was had the chair of the Summit of the Americas, the president of Colombia, Juan Manuel Santos, who has since won the Nobel Peace Prize, proposed that the Organization of American States undertake a re-examination of drug policy, and that's a process that I was involved in, and where Donald made an important contribution. The title of the project at first struck me as wrong. The project was called a Study of the Drug Problem in the Americas, and I thought that framing this as the drug problem was confusing, but the main thing I learned from that experience, that work in 2012 and 2013, is, in fact, this is a situation which different people find problematic for different reasons. And we used a method called transformative scenario planning. There was a scenario called Together, where the drug problem was seen essentially as a problem of crime and security. A very controversial scenario called Pathways, where the drug problem was seen as essentially a legal and regulatory problem. A scenario called Resilience, where the drug problem was seen as a health and community problem. And then a scenario called Disruption, where the drug problem was the unfairness of the international regime that particularly punishes countries that supply and transit, but not countries that consume. So this was my one and only experience with these issues, and it made some contribution, I think, to opening up the allowable discussion and the discussable options across the hemisphere and to some extent globally, and to be able to have a conversation like this, not just in Vancouver, but in Ottawa and in Brussels and in Buenos Aires, etc. Although I don't have a lot of expertise in drug policy, I do have some expertise in the processes by which such complex challenges can be addressed. In other words, in how we can move forward on addressing challenges such as the one that Donald has put in front of us. I have some expertise in what can't work and what can work for moving forward on these issues. So I'd like to just make 3 points about this, which I think suggest a way forward to addressing this terribly problematic situation. The first thing that can't work is to impose a solution. These challenges such as this one cannot be addressed by authorities and experts, or not alone. They don't have the insight, they don't have the understanding, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the power to implement solutions to these sort of complex issues. What can work is processes that involve the actors, experts, and the actors themselves, including politicians, health officials, police, people who use drugs, and others in co-creating a solution. And such a co-creative approach is simple, but it's really not easy. And it's especially not easy for people who think that they know what needs to be done, and if only everybody would listen to them, everything would be sorted out. The second aspect which can't work is a situation such as this cannot successfully be addressed through linearly trying to agree, let's agree the problem, let's agree the solution, let's agree the plan to implement the solution, let's execute the plan. It's really not possible to know in advance what will work in such a situation, and furthermore, it turns out we don't need to agree before we start on every step of the problem, the solution, and the plan. What can work is to take one step at a time, to feel our way forward. Again, this is simple, but it's not easy, especially for people who, by reasons of disposition or institutional rules, need to be in control of everything before it starts. And the third aspect which can't work is to take an approach where what each of us focuses on is to change what other people are doing. There was an expression in the 1960s, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. I actually think this is not the crucial point. What's much more crucial is that if you're not part of the problem, you can't be part of the solution. If you don't see how what you're doing or not doing is contributing to things being the way they are, then it follows logically you have no way to contribute to changing the way things are except from the outside by force. And I think Karen said this very clearly. We're in the situation we're in because of the choices we're making. And the crucial thing is not to spend all our time focusing on what other people ought to be doing, which in any event is a fruitless activity, but to focus on what is it that we ourselves need to do, what each of us needs to do next. And this again is simple but not easy, especially for those of us whose first instinct is to blame other people for the situation that we find ourselves in. So the kind of approach that I think can work for the challenge Donald has put to us is one that is co-creative, one that is experimental, and one where we focus above all on what can each of us do next. This approach won't by itself solve the problem that Donald has highlighted, but it will make it more workable. This approach will be more likely, with this approach, we're more likely to find a way forward through this complex mess. This is the approach that I think is required to address the challenges that Donald has put in front of us. Thank you.
All right. Now we have some time for questions. Oh, Christ. Dean Wilson. All right. And Bruce Alexander, second. Oh, my God. I'm in trouble.
I just want to talk about compassion within the confines of controversy. It was Christmas time, 2004. I was down to 110 pounds. I had very few options and even less hope. Don MacPherson took me into his house where Landon gave me a bowl of homemade soup, and they allowed me to relax for a little bit and act like a real human being. Your continued support, and of course Ann Livingston's continued support, has allowed me to come through to the other side, where I've had the same house for 7 years, the same phone number for 10. Donald, it's an honor for me to call you friend, and you deserve everything that you get, young man.
Thank you, old friend. Bruce.
Well, I'd like to thank all the speakers. This is really inspiring. And I'd like to go back to the title of your talk, Donald, the amazing talk, Heroin at Your Corner Store. And I listened very carefully, but my ears don't work as well as they did when I was younger. But I think that you stopped short of actually recommending heroin in corner stores. And I know that you know perfectly well that we have a long history in Canada of indeed selling opium and morphine and heroin in various medicines in corner stores. So, and I'm not, well, why did you stop short of actually recommending corner stores?
Oh, that's a very good question. Maybe it's because I've been captured by the public health lobby. It was a half-serious comment, but Bud was deadly serious about it. Because, and others have said this too, we're looking for we have the worst system of drug control that you could imagine. So we're looking for the least worst. It's not going to be perfect. And heroin in a corner store sales would be better.
But what you recommended was not that, but something short of that.
Well, I didn't get into that much detail, now, did I, Bruce? There's a lesson. When Professor Alexander asked you a question like that, there's a lesson here. I think we have to, I think I'm hearing, let's not throw out all of any of the options till we've had the process that Adam has recommended.
Let's make sure it's
Reasonably priced, okay. Are there any other questions? Right, down here. Jean Kavanaugh. Lovely to see you, dear.
The whole thing about selling it at the corner store, I mean, that's something, some people who I thought would be interested in drug policy reform went apoplectic and said, so what do you do, selling it in the corner store? And there are many smart people, many of them who are here in this room, who actually could come up with ways of legalization and regulation. And I'm just wondering, when is this going to happen? Do you think, can this happen? I mean, yeah.
Give me a few more weeks. No, that's the question, and we struggled with this at the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition. We decided to look, now is the time to try and raise the level of discussion up a bit and keep the discussion of regulation on. It comes up when the shit hits the fan. It comes up when, thousands of people die. But should the dying slow down, like in the 90s, people go back to their business as usual. And business as usual has a terrible grip on this field. To push through to actually keeping a real lively, multi-sectoral, multi-level discussion about, is heroin at the corner store a good idea, or should we be doing something else? What stops us from doing that? And that's what the coalition wants to explore, because those headlines said it all. People are saying we have to change what we're doing. That is a brilliant question. We used to say, cannabis legal? Not in my lifetime. Well, I don't know. So that's why we want to talk to Canadians about this issue. Call up everyone who's interviewed in the media saying that, heroin at the corner store or legalize this or legalize that. Okay, let's talk about it. Let's get beyond the rhetoric of it and see if we can work with the Canadian Public Health Association, the Health Officers Council of British Columbia have all recommended this. Canadian Public Health Association has a paper regulating psychoactive substances through a public health framework. It's there, it's sitting there, but it's a knowledge translation, to speak in academic terms. It's a KT problem. We're not talking about that in the public. We're not explaining that there is very solid evidence. That's what we do. We regulate things. We're really good at it. Too good at it, maybe. So the when question is, it sort of dogs us. Over here, and then over here. Yeah, you, Mr. Brunke. No, press the red light on. The red light on? All right.
Oh, there it goes. Okay. What is available right now around drug testing? If somebody has a drug and they're curious, like, what's the dose level? What am I actually ingesting? Is there anything right now where people can get drugs tested?
There's emerging. It's emerging, but no, I would say tonight, if you bought a drug, you would not, and I'm looking at Ken Tupper here, who knows a lot about this. I don't think you could go get your drug tested tonight. I think if you were at Shambhala Festival, you would be able to get your drug tested through a certain type of test. Do they all have mass spectrometers that tell you really what your drug is? No. So it's a nascent form right now, and it's much more developed in other countries, in European countries. We need, at the very least, we need to start doing that.
So I think Adam did a great job of telling us that, this is a complex problem and we need solutions appropriate for complex problems. But we also probably have a window of opportunity, both at the federal and provincial level, to make some real progress in the next year or two, something like that, when we think about our government, our cycles of election. So I guess the real question is, what's the low-hanging fruit that makes sense right now that we should be doing to move the needle in the next year or two, despite the fact that dialogue and engagement and all of those things are important to a complex problem like this? What do we need to do to move the needle in the next couple of years? What's the low-hanging fruit?
I think we have to begin the process. We have to begin. We would love the federal government to sanction a process. We've started developing our own commission, the People's Commission on Drug Policy. It would be better if a provincial government or a federal government were to sanction a process that we would construct and start. It's not just dialogue, but actually start working towards something. Civil society can write all the papers in the world and make all the recommendations in the world, but we're outside. We have lots of good ideas. You saw some of them tonight. So I think the sooner we can get some buy-in from municipal, provincial, or federal, all three, or even one of those. And that's what the Four Pillars was in Vancouver. It was a city trying to wrestle with this issue. And we couldn't go as far as a regulation discussion with the Four Pillars. That was not on for the mayor to do that. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to focus on the harm reduction stuff and heroin-assisted treatment. But it was a city process. It was an official city process convened by the mayor, and that bumped it up. That got people's attention, and that brought people to the table, and that brought senior politicians to the table, like provincial politicians and federal politicians were really, really interested. Said, Philip's doing what we're too afraid to do. So we would like to see that happen. That's one answer, and I know the woman at the back here, Libby Davies, she probably has a better answer. Libby, a long time, my MP, a fierce advocate for drug policy reform. I don't have a red button, but I'll try to speak up. Come, you need a microphone, come. Come and borrow a red button.
Thanks. Well, first of all, congratulations, Donald. And I really thought your title was terrific, Heroin in Your Corner Store, because it really does make us think. And I feel like you bring us a lot of optimism, even in the midst of a crisis. And I was thinking that, it doesn't necessarily have to be the 7-Eleven model. We have had a model. When you think of the compassion clubs that were hugely successful across the country, and the police left them alone, they're not-for-profit, they were user-controlled and run. And what I fear is that when we do go into this change, it is going to be this kind of corporate model that you put up on your slide. So we've actually had a model that's been working, the compassion clubs, and they've been shut down. So we take a step forward, we go back, we go forward. So I just wonder, let's expand the model. It doesn't have to be a for-profit basis, right? Regulation, I think sometimes people's eyes glaze over. They think of it as a bureaucratic exercise. So the idea of a community-based solution, I think, is one thing we should think about.
Thank you, Libby. Yes. The Compassion Clubs led drug policy reform in Canada. Around cannabis and medical cannabis. A question from Nicola Hall, from Grief to Action.
Yes, thanks, Don. Talking about timing, Justin Trudeau has gone, and the federal Liberal Party have gone for legalizing marijuana for all the reasons that you've been using, the logical, reasonable reasons that the war on drugs doesn't work. But he stops short. He says when he's asked, would he be prepared to go further and apply that to all drugs, he says no. And I'm wondering, so what do you think the reason for that is? Is it a moral thing? Is it that we can somehow stand the idea of people using cannabis, but we can't stand the idea of them using heroin? Is it the stigma? What do you think the reason is?
I think it's, and I know we're getting close to the end here. Okay. I personally think he spent enough political capital on drugs, and he wants to get cannabis in the ground and doesn't want to open up another front where he can be very vulnerable to the other parties. And all three parties should be working together on this. They should be saying this is an emergency. They'd all show up if there was a wildfire in their community. They'd all show up if the water was poisoned or if the food was poisoned. They'd all show up and they'd work together and they'd fight politically later. This issue is toxic, so that's really what I think it is. It's just no more drugs for this moment, So our theory of change is, if the Liberals get elected for a second term, something might happen in the first year of that second term. I don't know. They'd be ready to move to another level, but right now I think their inbox is full of people worried about what's going on. Mark Tyndall.
Thanks, Don. That was excellent. When you compare what happened in the 90s and what's happening now, I think the one big difference is HIV was really drove the first one, and it was thought to be a threat to everybody, and so that we better take care of the drug users. This is much different, and we've never really, and no other jurisdictions really dealt with a situation like this where the drugs have become so toxic. And so I think that it's going to be very difficult to get a political movement to really take this as seriously as it should be. And I think it's really up to us not to ask questions why Justin Trudeau thinks the way he does or why the Premier of BC thinks the way they do. But it's really going to take some serious activism, I think. And the OPSs were like amazing example of where we did illegal things and now everybody thinks they're great. So I really think we, if we want to save lives in the next year, we really can't be thinking way high, when's Trudeau going to make a decision for us, that we really need to, push forward, support activist groups and make things happen.
Agree 100%. Yeah. Don't worry, I'm not waiting for Justin. Tosh.
Thanks, Donald. I was just wondering, I'm at SFU. What can I do to help combat this problem? And jumping off of Adam, I am obviously a part of this problem. So what am I missing? And as a student at SFU, how could I? What do I need to see to better understand this problem and how I can help solve it?
That's always the greatest question. You can become more involved in any number of ways. You can become involved with the Students for Sensible Drug Policy at SFU, who have done incredible contributions to advocacy in Canada. You can come and talk to us, and you can help us figure out that Adam Kahane model of who needs to be in the room. I think these guys here have to be in the room. I think you have to be in the room. We need, Adam uses the term, the whole ecosystem. I would love it if SFU became a world leader in this field of drug policy and pulled together all its resources. We have amazing academics. One of them was here, Cora DeBeck's here somewhere, and who's just done a paper on criminalization and its impact on HIV. So let's talk, but also talk to your politicians, and whoever your MLA is, whoever your MP is, talk to your MPs. They need to hear it. It's as simple as that. They need to know this issue is not going away unless we change it up. I mean, they're being pressured to do a lot of things, like charge fentanyl dealers with murder, which is it's an emotional response, and it's not going to work. It's not going to help. It's going to clog up our jails, our prisons, our court systems, and it will target the wrong people. And it will be very expensive with the court battles that will go on around that type of thing. So educate yourself, look at the research, and organize, a dinner with your friends and talk about drug policy. And, we can give you lots of stats. And ask your friends if this is acceptable. I don't know. There's probably a million other good ideas in the room, too. So we'll have to have an idea fair. Anne Livingston. One last question to Anne. I hate to give Anne the last word.
So I just am curious. I mean, in the terms of all the sort of meetings you've been in and all the rooms you've been in, the place I see where we can't get people at the table are the police and the BC College of Physicians and Surgeons, who both are just gone bonehead mental with higher rates of heroin possession charges. Like, when did that happen? While we were saving people in alleys, we just didn't notice that the police were amping this up, which we have previously kind of wrapped them on the knuckles and had a little bit of cooperation. And then the College of Physicians with this new cutting everyone off pain meds, who are, we're terrified they're going to turn to street drugs. Do you have any history with them or any comment about either bringing both police and College of Physicians and Surgeons to the solving this and really participating in a community effort to lower the deaths?
Don't have a lot of experience. We did, work at the city with the city police, and they were part of our work with the 4 pillars. And they did produce their own 4 pillars drug policy, which was supportive of injection sites and supportive of heroin prescription. So they, the VPD at the senior levels are very reasonable, and they talk a good line. But that came through a lot of contact, a lot of talking, and we had some officers who were, they were interested, but they were also told to be interested because this was a collaborative project. But no, I don't think those conversations. If you travel the country and talk to needle exchange workers in Manitoba or New Brunswick, there are great police officers out there for sure. But generally, they're not very good at understanding this and moving beyond. And they're not the venues, they're not the forums. If there are the forums, they get yelled at. They're threatening forums. There's that safe tables thing that we said government should do, is to create some safe spaces where people can take off their holsters and their hats and actually have a conversation. And Adam, in an earlier meeting today, was, embrace conflict. So I was saying to someone that, the guys with the guns in the room are usually the most offended by conflict. They don't like to be criticized. Maybe it's because they get so much of it, and some of it may be warranted, some of it may not be. But there's not the tables, there's not the very safe places to have these conversations. So I think, and you've been on about this for a long time, kitchen table meetings and just bringing people together to talk the nuts and bolts of what's actually going on, but they have to be safe places for people to have that conversation. I think we have to end. Back over to you. Thank you very much.
I have attended Sterling event evenings for, I think, 15 years now. This is the best attended event we've ever hosted. But the second best attended event was by Bruce Alexander, sitting over here, who received the prize in 2007. Is that right, Bruce? Yeah. So those two things indicate to me there's no lack of interest in this particular topic. It's very widespread across the city, and hopefully tonight will help you take another step toward vitalizing that, at our provincial and federal levels. I have a few words of thanks to add this evening. Of course, Donald, thank you, and Adam and Karen for speaking this evening. I want to thank Elder Margaret and Peter also for speaking. Janet Weber and the SAU Public Square, thank you for so excellently managing this evening's event. It was really terrific. Thanks very much. And I was reflecting on my own personal experience with the Carnegie Center to find a way to sum up kind of what happened here this evening. So I grew up about a 12-minute bike ride from here, and I know that because I've made that bike ride many times as a kid, coming down here, traveling between my home in East Van, Kingsway and Fraser, and either Stanley Park or the Natural History Museum, which used to be housed in the Carnegie Center. So somewhat unusually for my cohort in East Van, I was interested in natural history, and so I often went to the Natural History Museum in the Carnegie Center. My dad had an office at Hastings, and Heatley was only a few blocks away, and on a Saturday morning, he'd spend a few extra hours in the office, clean odds and ends up, and I'd be able to go to the museum. Or ride my bike down. I often left my bike laying on the steps of the Carnegie Center, went inside for an hour or so and came back on, it was still there. So that's more than 50 years ago. So for 50 years, I've watched the bad drug policy in our city really erode the quality of life in many ways, not only for those involved in drug culture, but for all our citizens in the city. So it's really time to change that. So the phrase from Donald, it was your anecdote at the beginning of your talk, it said, and it reflects on the title this evening, the 7-Eleven model would be better than anything we have now, and I think that's really true. Finally, just a couple of things. Your name tags and your tent cards, there was boxes for them out front. Please drop those in on your way out. We have a reception out there. Please come and join us. And thanks to all of you for attending this evening. Oh, and pick up your Raise Shit t-shirt on your way out. Thanks very much for coming in. Good night. Yeah.